Hey there and welcome to ZDNet. If you're new to Photoshop, there's no need to be intimidated by all the tools and filters on there. The truth is that you'd actually be surprised by how easy it is to edit your photos and get the hang of it. But you have to start somewhere, so let's cover the basics of how to use Photoshop. Step number 1 is to open your image in Photoshop. So we're going to go to File up here and then Open and select the image you want to edit. I have this picture that was taken by my 5-year-old that I'm going to use, so don't expect professional quality, but I think there's a future there if I'm honest. Now we'll discuss how to do a quick edit so you can familiarize yourself with the basics of editing a photo in Photoshop. But I will make a disclaimer though that all photographers have different preferences and steps they take, since there are often several options to adjust colors and brightness, so many options will give you the same result. Alright, let's get to know Photoshop now that it's open. I use the Essentials layout, which is the default layout. And it has the tools on the left, options here are on top, and your layers and adjustments will be on the right. So Photoshop mostly works in layers. This means that when you make an adjustment like brightness and contrast, you're actually adding an adjustment layer on top of your picture, so that if you were to delete that layer, the brightness and contrast change that you made to the picture will go with it. It's good to keep in mind the order of the layers as well. If we have this image layer and the brightness and contrast one, we want the image one to always be the first layer from down up. If the brightness and contrast layer is underneath it, it won't be visible. So the second step I take is to crop and straighten the photo. Let's go and select the crop tool here on the left. And I will say most photos need to be straightened and you want to use the horizon as your guide. Viewing a tilted picture can detract from its balance and composition. It'll give you an odd feeling when you're looking at it, like it doesn't look quite right. Unless of course the tilt is intended as an artistic thing. Speaking of composition, cropping is one of the first steps I take when editing a photo. Cropping can adjust your composition though, so be mindful of that so you don't end up trimming something out that you wanted to include in the picture. Next we have levels. We'll choose levels from the adjustments here on the right. The levels adjustment layer shows us the histogram, which in a nutshell is a graph that shows us the light levels of the photo, including the contrast. Now don't worry too much about histograms right now since we're only covering the basics, but it's one of those things that it's good to get familiar with. Okay, so the left represents black or darker, the right white or lighter. It's good to have your waves taper out smoothly to both ends. Seeing an abrupt stop on one end or another could mean that your picture is over or underexposed, which is something to consider unless it's intentional like a night picture. If you take a picture in the dark at nighttime, for example, your waves to the left will not taper out smoothly because there's mostly shadows in the picture and that'll be visible in your histogram. So adjusting levels can be something that more experienced photographers do, but I think it's good to familiarize yourself with it. And you can see that we can lighten or darken the photo here, so just continue to play around with it until you find your photo's sweet spot. Let's talk a little bit about adding a color balance layer. You can also find this one here in the adjustments above layers. Color balance helps you adjust your image's colors in shadows, midtones, and highlights. This is very helpful when an image has a blue or red tinge, which honestly isn't even very common anymore with auto white balance, but it does happen sometimes, so it's good to know how to use it. In our example, my 5-year-old doesn't know how to adjust the white balance on the camera, so the picture has a magenta or reddish tint to it, so we're going to use the color balance to get that out. And as with anything on Photoshop, you just kind of play around with it until you get to your sweet spot. To remove any unwanted blemishes or spots on your photos, my go-tos are 2 tools. The first and easiest one is the Spot Healing Brush tool. which you'll find here on the left in your toolbar. Another thing to keep in mind is that when using tools like this one, you want to make sure that your image layer is selected instead of one of the adjustment layers. And you may also have to rasterize the layer by right-clicking on it and selecting Rasterize Layer. You gotta always keep those layers in mind. So the spot healing brush is as easy as just clicking on a spot and it will recognize what is different within its scope, and then it will remove the blemishes. So just for fun, let's remove all the tiny imperfections here on the planner. And this is also a good time to zoom in by choosing the little magnifying glass here on the toolbar. You'll be able to zoom in or out of your picture so you can work more closely within it. The other tool I do use a lot is the clone stamp tool. This one is pretty helpful to remove larger imperfections or even delete something from a photo. And it's also going to be on your toolbar to the left. And we do want to make sure, again, our image layer is selected and rasterized. So we have the scuff mark that I want to remove. We pick something to replace it with. I'm going to try with the same surface on the right of the spot here. So I'll place my cursor on the spot I want to clone, which is what I want to replace it with, and click on it while pressing down Alt. This will clone this little spot here, and if I go to the discoloration and click on it, it will stamp it. And I'll just fast forward here so you can see that it does take some time, and it definitely takes some trial and error. But this is why professional photographers charge so much for editing. And here's the finished result. You can see I left that drip mark on the left, but this is just a basic tutorial. I didn't want to get too complicated on the first how-to like this. So hopefully it'll get you more familiarized with Photoshop and you can play around with different features, get to know your tools, and see how they fit your needs.